At 8:14 on Tuesday morning, Shanice Merrigan read the final message from Joel Parnell, the administrator overseeing the transition of her great Aunt Yvette's estate. The required conditions have been satisfied, and the assets moving in her name carried an independently assessed value of exactly $500 million. Less than a minute later, she walked into the sunroom of the Brannick house and found two movers wrapping her walnut work desk in a padded blanket. Cynthia Brannick stood near the windows with a floor plan while Scott, Shanice's husband, watched from the doorway. "Please stop for a moment," Shanice said. The movers froze. Cynthia looked impatient. "They're on a schedule." Shanice touched the desk. Her client measurements, presentation boards, notebooks, and material samples had already been packed into gray bins. "Why is my workspace being moved?" "I need the room tomorrow for a family capital lunch," Cynthia said. "When was that decided?" "Last week." Shanice looked at Scott. "You knew." "Mom asked me. I said the room could be available." "Without asking me." Scott exhaled. "It's one lunch." "That wasn't my question." Cynthia stepped in. "You can work at the breakfast table for one afternoon." "I'm not asking where else I can sit." Scott's expression tightened. "Nobody is saying your work doesn't matter." Shanice glanced at the wrapped desk. "Then why was it the first thing that could be removed?" No one answered. $500 million sat silently in her phone, but Shanice did not reach for it. Most of the value was not spendable cash. A large non-controlling interest in Yvette's industrial packaging and distribution company accounted for the majority, with the rest spread across investment assets, commercial property interests, and reserves. None of that changed what had happened in this room. Shanice wanted one answer before money distorted it. "Scott, did you think I had the right to say no before you told your mother yes?" He rubbed his jaw. "I thought it was a reasonable household adjustment." "That still isn't an answer." Cynthia said, "A marriage cannot function if every accommodation becomes an argument about respect." Shanice looked at the packed bins. "And a family cannot claim respect while boxing someone's work without asking." One mover shifted awkwardly. Shanice noticed. Whatever happened between the Brannicks was not his burden to carry. "Nobody moves anything else until we resolve this," she said. "And neither of you loses pay because of us." The mover hesitated. "Ma'am, we were booked for 3 hours. What is the interruption charge if the job stops here?" Cynthia answered first. "Scott already paid them." Shanice kept her attention on the mover. "That pays for the scheduled move. I'm asking what they lose if I cancel it." He gave her the amount. Shanice opened her business account and paid it herself. "Thank you. Please leave the desk exactly where it is." The two men thanked her and stepped out. Cynthia folded her arms. "You're making 6 people reorganize tomorrow because you refuse to work somewhere else for a few hours." "No, I'm refusing to let 2 people reorganize my work without consulting me." Scott moved farther into the room. "Shanice, this house supports a lot of things, including your business." She looked at him. "Supports?" He seemed to hear the implication only after saying it. Cynthia did not retreat. "Scott pays most of the household expenses. He maintains this house. That context matters. Does paying more mean having more authority?" Scott answered carefully. "The person carrying more responsibility naturally has a larger say in some decisions." Shanice felt something inside her settle. "If I carried more financial responsibility than you, would I get a larger say?" "That's hypothetical. The rules shouldn't change depending on who benefits." Scott shook his head. "You're reducing our marriage to a balance sheet." "You introduced the balance sheet." Cynthia picked up the floor plan. "You join an established family with established obligations. Sometimes that requires flexibility." "From whom?" Cynthia did not answer. Shanice looked from Cynthia to Scott. She had hoped the morning was merely poor communication. Now the shape of the problem was clearer. Scott did not think of himself as controlling. He thought contribution earned authority. Cynthia had built her decision around the same belief. Shanice's phone could destroy the assumption that she needed Scott's money, but if she revealed the inheritance now, she would never know whether they respected her boundary or only adjusted to her wealth. "I have a client presentation in less than 2 hours," she said. "I'm taking my laptop downtown. The desk stays until we finish this conversation." Scott's jaw tightened. "You don't get to dictate the house unilaterally." I'm not dictating the house. I'm withholding consent to remove my workspace. She picked up her laptop bag. Scott followed her into the hallway. If you want total financial independence, then we need a real conversation about what independence actually means. Shanice stopped. She could have told him everything. Instead, she asked, "What do you think it means?" "It means you don't get to reject shared financial structure only when you dislike where it leads." That answer changed the conflict. The sunroom was no longer only about a desk. It was about whether shared money had quietly become a source of marital rank. By noon, Shanice had completed her presentation from a borrowed conference room at a design supplier showroom. The client left satisfied, but Shanice remained behind, correcting two small details she normally would have caught before the meeting. The morning had cost her concentration as well as money. She called Scott. "Are you alone?" "At the office." "Good. I want to finish the conversation without your mother." "Phoenix, this morning you said greater financial responsibility creates a larger say. Did you mean it?" Scott sighed. "I said responsibility matters. Will my authority increase if I earn more than you? Why are you obsessed with reversing everything?" "Because I need to know whether this is a principle or a privilege." He was quiet. Then he said, "There are things I cover because we're married and because it makes sense. Car service for your site visits, software subscriptions, staff accepting deliveries. I'm not threatening you. I'm saying shared financial structure has consequences. Send me the list of expenses you believe are specifically yours rather than ours." "Why?" "Because you asked for clarity. I thought we were trying to solve this." "We are." Shanice closed the corrected plans. "I need to know which parts of our life you consider partnership and which parts you consider generosity that gives you leverage." Scott's voice cooled. "You're making this adversarial." "No, I'm making it observable." When the call ended, Shanice admitted her own mistake. She had known for weeks that Yvette's estate would likely be substantial. She had waited for confirmation because the final valuation and transfer status were incomplete. That was reasonable, but she had also stayed quiet because she wanted certainty before allowing the inheritance into her marriage. Her silence had allowed Scott to keep believing she depended almost entirely on him. That did not create his belief that money earned authority, but it had delayed the moment when the assumption could be tested honestly. Shanice returned home shortly after 3. The desk was still wrapped. Cynthia was arranging folders for the next day's lunch on a temporary table. "Scott says you objected to discussing finances," Cynthia said. "I objected to finances being used as voting power. I have no interest in being placed between you." Shanice looked at the wrapped desk. "You arranged this move and discussed my reaction with him. You're already involved." Cynthia stiffened. "Phoenix, I chose to arrange the room. I believe the lunch mattered more than your setup for one day." "Thank you for owning that." Shanice walked to the desk, removed the padded blanket, folded it beside the door, and placed her laptop on the walnut surface. "The move is canceled. My work resumes here. If you want the room tomorrow, ask me. If I say no, find another location." Cynthia stared at her. "You are serious?" "Yes." Cynthia gathered her folders and carried them toward the dining room. Shanice sat down and reopened her client plans. The first consequential boundary was now complete before Scott or Cynthia knew she had inherited $1. That evening, Scott sent Shanice the expense list he had promised. It was shorter than she expected. 2 software subscriptions, occasional car service, a premium mobile plan, and staff assistance with professional deliveries. None of it threatened her livelihood. The list mattered because Scott had been able to identify the items within hours. Shanice moved the subscriptions to her business account and booked her own transportation for the next morning. When Scott came home, he found the confirmation emails beside her laptop. "You didn't have to do this tonight," he said. "You said independence had costs." "I was making a point." "So was I." Scott pulled out a chair. "What happens now?" Shanice closed the laptop. "Tomorrow afternoon, I have a meeting about a personal financial matter. After the final verification, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you earlier." His expression changed. "Debt?" "No." "Business trouble?" "No." "Then what?" "Tomorrow." "How long have you known?" "That something significant was changing." "Weeks." "That the transfer was formally confirmed?" "Since yesterday morning." Scott stared at her. You let me talk about supporting you all day while you were sitting on some financial secret. Yes, that is the part one handled badly. She did not defend herself. I waited for certainty longer than I should have. My silence allowed your assumption to continue. What assumption? That my practical choices depended on your money. Don't turn this around. I'm not. I am separating two things. I should have disclosed sooner that my circumstances were changing. You still chose to treat financial contribution as authority before you knew anything had changed. Scott stood. How big is this? Big enough that tomorrow I want you to hear the fact from people who know different parts of them. People. Joel Parnell and an independent valuation professional. Scott's expression hardened further. You already have professionals involved. They were involved before our argument. And I knew nothing. You knew Yvette had died and that I was dealing with her estate. You did not know the scale. Because you did not tell me. Correct. Shanice let the admission stand. She would not use Scott's mistake to erase her own. The next morning, Cynthia arrived before 9. I moved the capital lunch to the club, she said. Shanice looked at her. Thank you. Cynthia glanced toward the sunroom. I still think this became larger than necessary. I know. She paused. But I should have asked before arranging the movers. Scott, standing near the kitchen counter, said, Good. Then maybe we can stop treating the desk like a constitutional crisis. Cynthia turned toward him. No, I arranged them. Let me finish. Scott looked surprised. Cynthia faced Shanice again. I assumed Scott's approval was enough because he carries most of the cost of this house. That was my choice. That matters, Shanice said. Cynthia left shortly afterward. Scott looked at Shanice. The room is restored. What else do you need? I need to know whether the rule is gone. What rule? More money, more authority. You keep saying it in the harshest possible way. Because yesterday you demonstrated it in the mildest possible way. Scott rubbed his forehead. And today you're going to reveal some financial fact that proves you were never dependent. It will prove only one factual assumption was wrong. What else could it possibly prove? Nothing about why you loved me. Nothing about whether your mother respects me. Nothing about what either of you will do when a number changes your incentives. At 2:30, Shanice met Joel at the office where Yvette's estate and trust transition had been administered for years. Joel had known Shanice long before the conflict. Paula Kent, whose independent firm had valued Yvette's business interest and related holdings, joined briefly by video. Joel confirmed that the required transfer conditions had been satisfied and the transition was moving through ordinary completion. Paula confirmed the combined valuation, exactly $500 million. Most of the value sat in a non-controlling interest in Yvette's industrial packaging and distribution company, with the remainder spread across investment assets, commercial property interests, and reserves. No one suggested it was $500 million in cash. When Paula disconnected, Joel closed his notebook. Do you want Scott included in any future discussion? One meeting, Shanice said. I want him to hear the source, transfer status, valuation, and access limits from the people responsible for those facts. Joel nodded. I can explain administration. Paula can explain valuation. Neither of us can tell you what the information means for your marriage. Exactly. Shanice called Scott. Tomorrow at 9:30. Joel's office. About the financial matter? Yes. After a pause, Shanice added, I'm inviting your mother for the relevant portion too. She has been part of the argument about financial authority. She should hear the same facts. Scott was silent. How big is this, Shanice? She looked through Joel's glass wall at the city. Big enough that after tomorrow, none of us will be able to hide behind assumptions. At 9:30 the next morning, Shanice sat at one end of a small conference table with Scott beside her and Cynthia across from them. There was no oversized check, dramatic envelope, or surprise will. Joel had a notebook. Paula waited on a screen to join for her portion. Scott looked impatient. Can someone finally tell me what this is? Shanice answered first. Yes, but I need to own something before they do. I should have told you earlier that my financial circumstances were changing substantially. I waited because the administrative and valuation work was incomplete. That was reasonable up to a point. After I knew the change would be significant, I also stayed quiet because I did not want the money to contaminate every conversation we were having. That choice had a cost. It let you keep believing I was financially dependent on you. Scott's expression tightened. How significant? Shanice looked at Joel. Tell them what you can actually verify. Joel nodded. My role is narrow. Yvette Merrigan was Shanice's maternal great-aunt. Shanice had a lifelong relationship with her. Yvette built Merrigan Industrial Packaging and Distribution over several decades and held other investments and commercial property interests. The estate and trust structures existed before Yvette's death and have been in ordinary administration since then. Scott turned to Shanice. And Yvette, the one you visited in Maryland? Yes. Joel continued. The relevant transfer conditions have been satisfied. The transition is effective and moving through normal completion. That does not mean every asset is liquid or immediately spendable. Paula joined the call. My firm independently valued the relevant interests as of the specified valuation date. The combined value used in the transition is exactly $500 million. Scott said nothing. Cynthia's posture changed immediately. Paula continued. Approximately $310 million is represented by a non-controlling interest in the operating company. Roughly $115 million is held in diversified investment assets within the trust structure. Commercial property interests account for approximately $60 million, and reserves and cash equivalent holdings account for approximately $15 million. Different assets carry different obligations and liquidity characteristics. My role is valuation, not family planning. She answered two narrow questions from Joel and signed off. The room went quiet. Shanice did not fill the silence. She wanted to hear the first question. Scott asked it. How does this affect our financial planning? Something inside Shanice went still. Joel answered carefully. That is not a question I can answer for your marriage. I can only explain authority within structures I administer. Cynthia leaned forward. Would a spouse normally be involved in governance discussions at this scale? Joel looked at Shanice before replying. There is no automatic governance role for Mr. Brannock or any other family member who has not been granted one under the governing structures. Cynthia said, I'm not talking about automatic control, but $500 million cannot be treated like a private checking account. Shanice looked at her. The first question from both of you was about integration. Scott turned. What did you expect me to ask? Something about me. You hid this for weeks, and I already admitted that delaying disclosure was my mistake. You accused me of using money as power while knowing this was coming. I knew it would be substantial. I did not have the final valuation until this week. I should have told you sooner that my financial position was changing. I own that. Now answer the question I asked before any of us knew the number. Should financial contribution determine authority in our marriage? Scott looked away. Cynthia said, scale matters. For asset decisions, yes. Why should it change whether my consent matters? Cynthia did not answer. Scott said, nobody suddenly respects you more because of a number. Good, Shanice replied. Then prove that over the next few days. How? Do the things I asked before you knew. Stop treating financial contribution as voting power. Stop using your mother as an intermediary in decisions about me. And do not ask for access to this inheritance as proof that I trust you. Scott's jaw tightened. You are assuming I want access. You asked about our financial planning before asking whether I was okay. Cynthia began to say something about family continuity. Shanice raised one hand. We are not turning the second half of my marriage into an asset management seminar. Professionals can handle the assets. My question is simpler. If Paula had said $50,000 instead of $500 million, would either of you believe my consent deserved less weight? Neither answered. Joel closed his notebook. My administrative portion is complete. I'll give you privacy. After he left, Scott said, you cannot expect me to have no opinion about $500 million entering our marriage. Have an opinion. I'm asking whether your opinion becomes authority. Marriage means planning together. Then the next question is whether planning remains voluntary when one person says not yet. The inheritance had ended the argument about dependence. It had not solved the marriage. That evening, Scott entered the sunroom, carrying 2 glasses of wine. Shanice was working at the restored walnut desk. Peace offering, he said. For what? The last few days. Which part? Scott gave a tired laugh. You want itemized apologies? I want to know whether we understand the same problem. He sat opposite her. Phoenix, I should have asked before letting Mom move the desk. I should not have used household expenses in a way that made you feel financially subordinate. And I'm angry that you kept the inheritance from me. All three can be true. Then let's move forward. What do you want me to do? Bring me into your financial future. Shanice watched him. Which part? The trust, the business interest, the properties. At least let us understand what planning together would look like. That is exactly the problem. It is not greed to think married people should plan together. Would you have this urgency if the valuation were $5 million? Yes. 500,000? His jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. No, it is the uncertainty I cannot escape. The money proves I was not dependent on you. It cannot prove whether your behavior now is about me or the scale. Scott leaned back. So anything kind I do becomes suspicious. Possibly. Shanice looked at the closed inheritance folder at the corner of a desk. I thought facts would clarify everything. Instead, the biggest fact makes motive harder to read. That is the part one cannot solve with evidence. Scott's anger softened into frustration. Then what am I supposed to do? Accept temporary physical distance. No financial integration discussions. No calls to Joel. No request to meet Paula. No Brannick family office. No using Cynthia as an intermediary. We focus only on whether this marriage can function when neither person gets guaranteed authority over the other's assets. You want me to leave my own house? I can stay elsewhere. So now that you can afford anything, leaving becomes easy. The sentence hurt because part of it was true. Yes, Shanice said. Scott blinked. Yes. The inheritance changes what I can afford to do. It makes distance easier. And because I delayed telling you, you can reasonably wonder whether I would have set the same boundary if leaving were financially harder. Would you? Shanice did not give herself a perfect answer. I don't know. I believe I should have. I hope I would have. But I cannot prove who I would have been in a life I am not living. Scott looked almost vindicated. Then maybe you were using the money too. I'm using my freedom. I'm trying not to use it as a weapon. She leaned forward. My uncertainty does not erase what you actually did. I'm asking whether you can respect the boundary without being promised that I will stay. You want me to accept separation and give up influence with nothing guaranteed in return. Yes, that is what makes it repair instead of a transaction. The next morning, Cynthia came alone. Scott told me you want temporary separation. Yes. I think you're turning one ugly week into a verdict on 6 years. I'm examining the structure that one ugly week exposed. Cynthia placed her handbag on the counter. $500 million affects family security, whether you like it or not. What is your actual goal? Cynthia paused. To prevent an enormous pool of capital from sitting outside the family system while still influencing the family's future. Shanice nodded. That is honest. You make it sound controlling. You call it continuity. I call it control. Shanice asked one question. If I had inherited nothing, would you still believe moving my workspace without asking was wrong? Cynthia looked toward the sunroom. Yes. Would you still have moved it? A longer silence. Probably. Then knowing it was wrong would not have changed your action. Cynthia absorbed that. No, she said quietly. Probably not. That is responsibility, not the inheritance. Cynthia left with the question instead of another argument. Shanice remained uncertain whether either Brannick would change, and she accepted for the first time that she might have to decide without ever knowing their motives perfectly. 2 days later, Cynthia returned to the sunroom and knocked on the open frame before entering. Shanice looked up. You don't have to knock. Maybe I do for a while. Cynthia remained standing. The club asked whether I wanted the private room again next month. I booked it. For the capital lunch? Yes. She took a breath. And I told Scott I will not host, arrange, or attend any meeting about your trust or inheritance unless you specifically ask me to participate. Shanice closed her laptop. What? Cynthia gave a thin smile. You never accept the convenient answer. The convenient answer is usually image. Cynthia walked to the window. I still believe families with substantial assets benefit from coordination. I have not changed my mind. That is fine. but I realized I was treating your marriage as an entry point into your finances. I would not tolerate another family doing that to Scott. Did Scott ask you to speak with me? He asked me to convince you that integration was sensible. And I told him no. The choice mattered because Cynthia gave something up: influence, alignment with her son, and the family control objective she had defended from the beginning. I also arranged the movers, Cynthia said. I believe Scott paying most of the household expenses meant his approval was sufficient. That was my choice. I was wrong. Shanice nodded. Thank you. The storage shelves were moved before the job stopped. I can have them returned tomorrow if you want. Ask me before scheduling it. Cynthia closed her eyes briefly. Right. Tomorrow at 10. That works. I'll confirm before booking. It was a small correction, but it changed the process instead of decorating it with apology. Cynthia sat opposite the desk. For what it's worth, I don't think Scott consciously wants your money. Neither do I. Cynthia looked surprised. Then what are you testing? Whether he believes financial integration is a condition of marriage even after I ask him to pause it. Cynthia looked toward the desk. His father controlled every major account in our marriage. Shanice waited. I hated it, Cynthia continued. Scott watched us fight about money for years. After his father died, he said he would never leave a wife financially uncertain. That can be generous. It was meant to be. Generosity becomes control when the giver decides what the gift buys. Cynthia nodded slowly. Maybe I helped teach him that without meaning to. Understanding the pattern is not the same as changing it. I know. Cynthia left. That evening, Scott came home already aware of his mother's refusal. Congratulations, he said. You got Mom to back away from me. She made her own decision. After talking to you, adults receive information and make choices. Scott placed both hands on the counter. I called our family office today. Shanice's expression changed. Why? To understand what questions I should be asking. About my assets? About what this means for us. I explicitly asked you not to start integration work. I did not call Joel. You found a technical loophole in a relationship boundary. That is not fair. Did you tell your office that I asked you not to pursue integration? Scott said nothing. Shanice nodded. That omission matters more than their advice. I was gathering information. For a path, I asked you to pause. Scott paced around the island. I think your boundary is unreasonable. Then say that directly. Fine. I think it is unreasonable for married people to pretend $500 million has no effect on their shared future. I never asked you to pretend it has no effect. I asked you to show that our relationship has value even when access is unavailable. And how am I supposed to prove that? Temporary distance. No integration effort. Respect the boundary without any guarantee I forgive you. Scott stared at her. You expect me to give up influence and accept separation with nothing in return. I expect you to decide whether respect is still worth practicing when it is not a transaction. Scott looked away. The fair repair opportunity was now unmistakable. Cynthia had already demonstrated that an adult could relinquish influence without receiving a reward. Scott understood the condition. What happened next could no longer be explained as confusion. The following Monday, Shanice moved into a furnished apartment near her downtown clients for a 90-day separation. She did not buy a mansion or change the locks on the Brannick house. She took clothes, work files, her laptop, and a few personal things. The inheritance made the expense easy, but the decision still hurt. On her first night there, Shanice sat alone and wondered whether financial freedom had made her mistake caution for clarity. She had withheld important information too long. Earlier disclosure might have forced a healthier conversation sooner, but it would not have made the movers ask permission. It would only have changed what Scott believed Shanice's consent was worth. 2 days later, Scott called. Can we have dinner? To discuss us? Yes. Not the trust. Not the trust. They met at a quiet restaurant they had used for ordinary weeknight dinners. For the first 20 minutes, Scott did what Shanice had hoped. He asked about her work. He admitted, specifically, I used what I paid for to end arguments faster. Shanice nodded. That is closer to what I experienced. I am sorry. I believe you are sorry. But regret is not enough. No. Repair is behavior. Scott nodded. Then he looked down at his water glass. There is one practical issue I need you to hear without assuming the worst. Shanice became still. Go ahead. Our family office believes it would be irresponsible not to establish at least a communication channel with whoever administers the trust. You said this dinner was not about the trust. It is about us, because finances at this scale affect us. Did you contact Joel? Scott paused. I emailed him this afternoon. The answer settled between them. What did you ask? For a meeting, not access. A meeting about how household financial planning might interface with the trust structure. After I specifically told you not to contact him, I asked for information. What did Joel say? That he could not discuss administration, governance, or coordination with me without your authorization. And then, Scott hesitated. I replied that I was your husband and wanted to understand the process for obtaining appropriate authorization. No stolen email or secret recording was necessary. Scott told her voluntarily because he still believed his action was defensible. Why? Shanice asked. Because I think your boundary is damaging our marriage. So, you violated the boundary to save the marriage. I requested a conversation. Stop minimizing with nouns. You contacted the one person I explicitly asked you not to contact about assets you have no automatic role in. Scott leaned forward. Because the idea that we should operate as two financial islands is impossible. We were never two financial islands before. Because we shared. We share because you thought the sharing moved mostly from you to me. That is not fair. Then answer this. When you believed you had more financial power, you called extra influence responsibility. Now that I have independent wealth, you call integration partnership. What principle stayed the same? Scott rubbed his face. Marriage means mutual obligation. Agreed. Then your trust cannot be completely untouchable while my life is shared. I asked for 90 days without integration efforts while we determined whether our marriage could exist without guaranteed access. You did not make it a week. Because the premise is wrong. Shanice looked at him. Then, this is your answer. Scott's expression changed. Don't turn one email into a verdict on 6 years. The email is not the verdict. The choice is. I apologized. I admitted what I did with household expenses. What else do you want? I wanted you to respect one boundary without being promised a reward. Scott lowered his voice. That amount changes everything. Shanice felt sadness settle into. Clarity. It changed your options. It did not change my requirement, which is that my personhood not become more valuable because my balance sheet did. Scott looked away. What happens now? I decide privately. I am not turning a restaurant into a courtroom. Shanice paid her share of the meal and left. Scott remained wealthy, respected, and fully capable of choosing differently. His final wrong choice was not criminal or spectacular. It was ordinary. After accurate information, fair notice, and a clear repair route, he still treated financial integration as more urgent than the boundary designed to test whether the marriage could survive without it. 3 mornings later, Shanice met Scott at the Brannick house. The sunroom looked almost exactly as it had before the movers came. The walnut desk stood beneath the windows. The storage shelves had been restored after Cynthia asked before scheduling the work. On the desk sat client plans, a mug Shanice had forgotten, and no inheritance documents. Scott stayed near the doorway. Joel emailed me yesterday, Shanice said. He recorded your contact and confirmed that he gave you no information. Scott nodded. I haven't contacted him since. Good. I told the family office to stop anything related to your inheritance. Also good. He waited. Shanice continued. Those are responsible steps. They do not purchase reconciliation. Scott looked down. I know. I've spent several days asking whether I am making this decision because I can afford to. The answer is partly yes. Money makes leaving easier. Pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Scott looked at her. So if you had not inherited it, I don't know what I would have done. She did not retreat from the answer. I believe I should have set the same boundary. I hope I would have. But I cannot prove the noblest version of myself. That uncertainty is mine. Then maybe neither of us should make a permanent decision based on one terrible week. I'm not. Shanice rested one hand on the desk. I'm making it based on the structure the week revealed and what we each chose after we understood it. Scott moved closer. I changed. Some things. You apologized specifically. You stopped some actions. But when I gave you one clear repair condition, no integration work while we separated, you decided the condition itself was unacceptable. Because marriage means sharing. Sharing is voluntary. Access is not the same thing. Scott looked toward the windows. What are you saying? Shanice met his eyes. I am ending the marriage. No one entered. No crowd heard it. Scott did not fall to his knees. The house remained quiet. You already filed? No. I will take the ordinary private steps with appropriate professionals. I'm telling you first because the relationship decision belongs between us. There's no path back. I'm not leaving a romantic door open as consolation. I am deciding that this marriage, as it functioned, is over. His eyes reddened. I did love you. Shanice believed him. I believe you did. Then why isn't that enough? Because love does not automatically create equality. We prove that. Scott sat in the chair opposite the desk. What happens to the house? Whatever happens through ordinary private decisions. I'm not taking it from you. I do not want to buy it to prove something. My company is yours. You can make this ugly. Shanice looked at him. I don't want the kind of victory where hurting you proves my worth. Scott looked away. What will you do with $500 million? Learn. Keep competent professionals where appropriate. Make decisions slowly. Continue my work. You're really going back to space plans? For the first time that morning, Shanice almost smiled. I like my work when you thought it was small. Later that afternoon, Cynthia came to the house. He told me, she said. Shanice nodded. Cynthia looked around the sunroom. I wish I could say I didn't help bring you here. It didn't end the marriage. No, but I participated in a structure that made this ending possible. Cynthia took a breath. I am sorry. I know. I'm not asking you to absolve me. Good. Cynthia looked at the desk. I thought protecting the family system justified deciding who had to adapt. I did not notice how often the person adapting was someone with less financial power. What will you do with that? Try not to repeat it. That is enough for today. In the weeks that followed, nothing spectacular happened. Scott remained wealthy and continued running Brannock Capital Systems. Cynthia kept her social world and many of her old opinions. Joel continued administering the structures already in place. Paula's valuation remained what it had always been, a valuation, not a moral judgment. Shanice began the private process of ending the marriage. She did not buy Scott's company, seize his property, or build a revenge empire. She continued her consulting practice and declined advisors who seemed more excited about the scale of her inheritance than about the responsibilities attached to it. On a clear Thursday morning, Shanice returned to the sunroom to collect the last professional materials stored there. She sat at the walnut desk for one final client call before moving it to a studio she had leased for her business. Joel's inheritance folder rested closed at the far corner. Her laptop showed renovation plans for a small independent hotel whose owner needed 3 accessible rooms redesigned without losing a week of bookings. Shanice measured a corridor width twice, corrected a note, and felt the quiet satisfaction of getting something right. $500 million had changed the choices available to her. It had not made her wiser overnight. It had not turned Scott into a monster or Cynthia into a saint. It had simply removed the financial assumption that had hidden the true argument in her marriage. Once that assumption disappeared, every adult had been free to choose. Cynthia chose, belatedly, to relinquish authority she had taken without permission. Scott chose financial integration even after being offered repair without it. Shanice chose a life where respect could not be rented from the person with a larger account. Then she closed the client file, lifted her mug from the desk, and returned to the work she had valued long before anyone else understood what she was worth. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.